Nobody told you this directly, but if you stop to observe objectively, you'll realize the world doesn't reward those who are good. It rewards those who understand the game. And here's the unsettling part. Perhaps you were trained to believe the exact opposite, to be transparent, accessible, and fair all the time, to trust that by doing the right thing, the result would come naturally. But in practice, while you were following this script, someone more strategic was reading your patterns, anticipating your decisions, and using that to their advantage. It's hard to accept, but it's liberating when you understand. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, has always been operating around you, with or without your awareness. And that's why this content isn't comfortable, because it shatters a dangerous belief. That intention is enough. It's not enough. The end justifies the means, when the means are your own protection against asymmetrical environments. You've probably felt this firsthand. That feeling of always over-explaining yourself, giving in too much, being misinterpreted even when trying to do everything right. And while you try to correct this with more clarity, more effort, more dedication, the problem persists. Not because you're not good enough, but because you're playing a game where simply being good is exactly what makes you predictable. And predictability at that level is weakness. This is where one of Machiavelli's most uncomfortable ideas comes in. It's better to be feared than loved, but above all, avoid being easily read. Now pay attention to this. You don't need to become cold, distant, or manipulative to change this scenario. But you do need to become strategic. Someone who understands when to speak, when to be silent, when to act, and when to simply observe. Someone who masters the calculated use of force, who maintains an appearance of virtue without naively exposing themselves, who develops constant adaptability in the face of different contexts. Because, in the end, the game isn't about attacking. It's about not being an easy target. And when you start operating at that level, something silently changes. You stop chasing validation and start building something much more powerful: control. And that's exactly what these 7 tactics will show you. Not how to win by shouting, but how to win without needing to show off. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos. It's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He begins by observing something few dare to admit. Good people, in the naive sense of the word, are almost always predictable. And predictability, in the real game of life, the one he describes as being guided by human nature, not ideals, is a weakness disguised as a virtue. Those who live expecting automatic reciprocity believe, deep down, that the world operates on the basis of moral justice. But it doesn't, it never has. While they act based on high values, someone more strategic reads their patterns, anticipates their reactions, and uses that against them. This is where the idea of politics guided by reality, not ideals, comes in. The person who always helps, always responds quickly, always gives in, without realizing it, is training others to exploit them. It's like an emotional ATM, available, predictable, and easy to access. A simple example: at work, the one who always says, "Let me handle it," becomes the first to be overloaded, not because they are competent, but because they are too accessible. And worse, they still expect recognition. But in this game, recognition rarely comes, the bill comes due, and sometimes the discard. Now consider the contrast. While one relies on the idea that good always triumphs, the other operates on something closer to decisions based on real human nature. He understands that people respond to incentives, not intentions. He doesn't give everything away immediately, doesn't reveal all his cards, doesn't position himself as predictable. And this completely changes the dynamic. It's not about becoming cold or manipulative, but about abandoning strategic naivete. Because ultimately, the problem isn't being good. It's being good without criteria. It's being accessible without filters. It's acting as if everyone is playing the same game as you, and they're not. Some play to win, others play to survive, and some play to use you as a pawn. When he begins to realize this, something changes. He starts to observe more, speak less, react with more intention. He understands that the appearance of virtue, as Machiavelli would say, is often worth more than virtue displayed without protection. Because the world doesn't reward purity, he tests limits. And it is at this point that the turning point begins to take shape. He realizes that he doesn't need to stop being who he is, but he needs to stop being predictable. He needs to understand that the end justifies the means when the means are his own emotional and strategic survival. Not in the vulgar sense of manipulation, but in the refined sense of self-preservation. He begins to ask himself, am I being good or just easy to use? And this question changes everything, because from it, a new posture emerges. A posture where helping is not automatic, where access is not unrestricted, where yes becomes strategic. And curiously, it is at this moment that people begin to treat him differently, not out of moral respect, but out of perceived value. Because, deep down, the world respects more those who cannot be easily accessed, and it is precisely here that he begins to understand something even deeper. Sometimes, appearing weak, but in a controlled way, can be one of the greatest advantages someone can have. He begins to realize something counterintuitive and at the same time profoundly strategic. Demonstrating strength all the time isn't always intelligent. In fact, often it's quite the opposite. Those who constantly display strength become predictable, a direct target, someone who arouses resistance. But the one who masters the game understands something suggested between the lines. True virtue lies not in showing power all the time, but in knowing when to conceal it. Weakness, when used consciously, ceases to be vulnerability and becomes a tool. He learns to position himself in a way that makes the other underestimate him, and this creates a silent advantage. Because whoever underestimates lowers their guard, and whoever lowers their guard reveals more than they should. In competitive environments, this is gold. Imagine a negotiation. While one tries to prove they know everything, the other asks simple questions, seems unassuming, and in the process extracts valuable information. In the end, the one who seemed less prepared comes out with more power. Not by luck, but by strategy. And that's where a point that few people see comes in, the calculated use of force. It's not about being strong all the time, but about being strong at the right moment. He begins to understand that reacting to everything, responding to everything, proving everything is a waste of energy and unnecessary exposure. Instead, he observes. He lets the other person speak more, act more, expose themselves more. And the more the other person exposes themselves, the clearer the map of intentions, insecurities, and priorities becomes. It's like a game of chess. Whoever moves first without thinking reveals their plan. Whoever waits, reads. Whoever reads, controls. And this connects directly to the idea of, it's better to be feared than loved, but before being feared, one must not be fully understood, because the unknown generates caution, and caution generates respect. A practical example. In professional discussions, the one who doesn't respond immediately, who pauses, who chooses their words carefully, is usually seen as more secure and more difficult to manipulate. Not because they talk more, but because they talk less, and intentionally. Over time, he begins to master this balance. It's not about feigning weakness theatrically, but about controlling how much he reveals, how much he reacts, how much he positions himself. He understands that selective force is more effective than constant force, that strategic silence is worth more than impulsive explanations, and that often letting the other person believe they have an advantage is what allows him to turn the tables later. This constant adaptability, another essential principle, completely transforms his way of moving in the world. He ceases to be reactive and becomes intentional. And the more intentional he becomes, the more he realizes that true power lies not in imposing, but in leading without being noticed. And it is precisely at this point that a silent risk arises, when he starts talking too much, justifying too much. Without realizing it, he may reveal exactly what he has been protecting. At some point, he notices a pattern that had previously gone unnoticed. The more he explains, the less authority he conveys. It seems strange at first because we've been conditioned to believe that clarity is synonymous with respect. But in the real game, the one where decisions are based on human nature, not ideals, over-explaining often sounds like insecurity disguised as logic. Each justification opens a loophole. Each additional argument provides context, and context, for those who operate strategically, is raw material. He begins to notice that truly influential people don't feel the need to constantly justify themselves. They communicate decisions, they don't beg for validation. And this is directly linked to the principle of appearance of virtue. Because those who seem confident, even without explaining everything, generate more impact than those who try to convince at any cost. A practical example. In a meeting, the one who answers directly, "It doesn't make sense for us right now," is usually more respected than the one who goes into long explanations trying to please everyone. It's not arrogance, it's positioning. And here's a delicate point: the need to be understood can become a trap. He realizes that deep down, over-explaining often stems from a hidden desire for acceptance, a desire for the other person to understand, agree, and validate. But this puts him in an inferior position in the dynamic, because whoever seeks approval automatically relinquishes power, and whoever relinquishes power opens himself up to being questioned, pressured, and even manipulated. That's exactly why this idea remains relevant. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean pleasing everyone, but rather not exposing oneself unnecessarily. When he starts to reduce explanations, something curious happens. People begin to project more onto him. They begin to respect his limits more, because what isn't fully explained requires interpretation, and interpretation generates caution. A simple, everyday example. When someone says, "I can't today," and stops there, the conversation ends. But when they start to over-justify, "It's because I have this, then that," it opens the door to negotiation, insistence, and pressure. Over time, he learns to communicate with more precision and less strain. He understands that true authority isn't built through long speeches, but through clear and consistent decisions. That silence often communicates more than any explanation, and that an excess of words can dilute the strength of a position. This doesn't mean being harsh or inaccessible, but rather strategic, knowing when to speak, how much to speak, and above all, what not to say. Because in the end, whoever reveals too much relinquishes control. And whoever relinquishes control, even without realizing it, makes the work easier for those who prefer to act in the shadows. And that's exactly how these players operate. Not confronting directly, but shaping the scenario around them, until you seem like the problem without even understanding how you got there. He begins to notice something even more subtle and more dangerous. The most effective attacks are rarely direct. They don't come as open confrontation, explicit discussion, or frontal criticism. They come as context, as small changes around him, as narratives being shaped without him realizing it. It's the kind of game he suggests when talking about politics guided by reality, not ideals. Because in practice, those who play strategically don't waste time trying to take you down in front of everyone. They alter the environment, they plant doubts, they adjust perceptions. And when you realize it, you're already reacting to a scenario that was carefully constructed against you. It's as if, little by little, the whole room starts looking differently, without anyone having said anything directly. A classic example: in the workplace, someone starts to praise you in a biased way. He's very good, he just sometimes takes a little while. And suddenly this idea starts circulating as truth. There was no direct attack, but the positioning was done. And the most dangerous thing about all this is that those who suffer this kind of manipulation tend to react in the wrong way. They try to defend themselves directly, explain, justify, confront, and without realizing it, reinforce exactly the narrative that was created. Because in the indirect game, those who react directly seem emotional, reactive, out of control. And this fits perfectly into the script of those who are manipulating the context. This is where one of the most uncomfortable ideas comes in: the calculated use of force. Not every battle should be fought on the visible field. Sometimes the best response is not to correct the narrative, but to create a new one. It's not to refute every point, but to reposition the perception. A practical example: instead of denying a criticism, they begin to act consistently in another direction, creating evidence that contradicts the original narrative without needing to confront directly. They don't enter the other person's game, they change the board. Over time, he understands that reputation isn't what you say about yourself, but what the environment believes about you, and that environment can be shaped, for good or for bad. Therefore, he begins to act with greater awareness of his positioning. Every action, every silence, every response, everything communicates. He learns to build a presence that makes indirect attacks difficult, not through confrontation, but through strategic consistency. Because ultimately, the goal isn't to win arguments. It's to avoid being put in positions where you need to defend yourself all the time. And that requires something few possess: context reading, reading intentions, reading invisible movements. And when he begins to see this clearly, he realizes there's an even deeper trap, especially when he insists on playing fair in environments where the rules have never been balanced. It takes him a while to accept this idea because it directly confronts everything he's been taught since childhood. Believing that being fair always leads to the best outcome is comfortable, but dangerous, especially when the environment is unbalanced. When one side plays by moral rules and the other plays by strategy, insisting on justice as the sole compass can become a trap. And this has nothing to do with conspiracy theory. It's pure observation of reality. As already hinted at in Reference Needed, decisions based on real human nature require understanding that not everyone is committed to the same principles. Some are committed to results. And in this type of scenario, the person who insists on playing right without evaluating the context ends up being the only one truly limited by the rules. A direct example? In negotiations, the one who reveals everything with absolute transparency while the other omits strategic information rarely comes out ahead. Not because they are wrong, but because they are playing a different game. And here's a point few dare to admit. Consequences shape behavior far more than moral appeals. He begins to realize that demanding justice, expecting empathy, or trying to convince them of what's right rarely changes the attitude of someone who has already decided to act opportunistically. What changes behavior is cost, its risk, its consequence. And this connects to a more raw interpretation of it's better to be feared than loved, as long as you avoid being hated. In other words, it's not about gratuitous intimidation, but about establishing clear boundaries that generate respect. Because in the end, respect without consequence becomes mere suggestion. A practical example. When someone constantly oversteps your boundaries, whether by delaying deliveries, disrespecting your time, or testing your patience, responding only with understanding can reinforce the behavior. But when there is a clear consequence, such as withdrawal of access, a change in priority, or even a simple firm no, the pattern changes, not because of morality, because of impact. Over time, he learns to differentiate between environments. He learns to identify when it's worthwhile to play fair and when it's necessary to play strategically to avoid being swallowed up. This doesn't mean abandoning values, but rather constant adaptability, another essential principle. He understands that being fair isn't being naive, and that protecting his interests isn't being dishonest. It's maturity, it's game reading. Because ultimately, the real mistake isn't believing in justice. It's believing that everyone around him is equally committed to it. And when he finally accepts this, something changes in his behavior. He stops reacting impulsively, stops trying to correct everything based on reason, and begins to control something much more powerful, the rhythm, because whoever controls the rhythm begins to control the game. He begins to realize that one of the greatest modern illusions is urgency. Everything seems to require an immediate response, a quick decision, an instant stance. But when he observes more closely, he understands that often this urgency is manufactured, created precisely to take away what he values most, clarity. And here enters one of the most silent and most powerful strategies that it suggests between the lines. Whoever controls time controls the outcome. Because whoever pressures you to decide quickly has usually already decided what they want from you. And the faster you react, the less you think. And the less you think, the more predictable you become. He begins to notice this in simple situations, a message that demands an immediate response, an unmissable offer that is only valid today, a discussion that tries to drag you into a confrontation in the heat of the moment. All of this has one objective: to reduce your analytical capacity. And whoever accepts this pace enters the other person's game without realizing it. And it is precisely here that silence ceases to be absence and becomes a strategy. He learns that not responding immediately is not weakness, it's control. That pausing before reacting is not indecision, it's applied emotional intelligence. And that, often, silence communicates more power than any argument, because silence creates space. And in that space, the other person begins to reveal themselves. They begin to speak more, justify more, expose themselves more. It's almost automatic. A practical example: in a negotiation, when he doesn't respond immediately to a proposal, the other side often comes back with more information, better conditions, or even concessions, all because they couldn't bear the emptiness of the response. This connects directly to the idea of calculated use of force. Not all force is action. Sometimes the greatest force is not acting at the expected moment. It's breaking the pattern. It's not delivering the reaction the other person anticipated. Over time, he begins to master the rhythm of situations. He no longer lets himself be swayed by artificial pressures. He doesn't react impulsively. He doesn't engage in discussions he didn't choose. he starts to operate with intention, not reactivity. And this completely changes how others perceive him, because those who can't be rushed can't be easily manipulated. And little by little, he realizes something even deeper. When his responses cease to be predictable, when his time ceases to be accessible, when his silence begins to carry weight, he becomes harder to read, harder to pressure, harder to use. And it is precisely this type of person who begins to become too expensive to manipulate. He reaches a point where everything starts to come together. It's no longer about reacting better, it's about positioning himself in a way that certain situations simply cease to occur. And that completely changes the game, because ultimately, manipulable people aren't chosen by chance. They're identified by patterns, excessive accessibility, predictable responses, a need to please, fear of confrontation. All of this forms a profile that's easy to exploit. But when he starts breaking those patterns, something curious happens. He ceases to be a viable option, not because of direct confrontation, not because of aggression, but because of cost. He becomes too expensive. And here, once again, the idea emerges strongly. Avoid being hated, but also don't be easily accessed, because whoever is always available is never strategically valued. They are seen as a resource, not as an asset. And this cost isn't about money. It's about energy, time, predictability. He starts limiting access. He doesn't answer everything, doesn't accept everything, doesn't explain himself to everyone. And this, initially, causes strangeness. Some people try to pull him back to the old pattern, with pressure, with guilt, with indirect hints. But that's exactly where the test lies. Because whoever insists on accessing you in an invasive way already saw you as easy. And when you stop being that way, the reaction comes. But this time, he doesn't give in. He understands that respect doesn't come from constant approval, but from strategic consistency. And this connects with virtù and fortuna, because luck favors the prepared, and preparation in this case is knowing how to say no, knowing how to withdraw, knowing how not to react. A practical example, he starts defining clear schedules, communication limits, criteria for accepting demands. It may seem simple, but this completely changes how others behave around him. Over time, the effect solidifies. People who previously tried to manipulate simply stop, not because they've changed, but because it's no longer worth it. The effort to influence them becomes too high, the return too low. And that's exactly what defines someone strategically strong. It's not about winning every battle, but about drastically reducing the number of battles necessary. They cease to be reactive, cease to be predictable, cease to be automatically accessible. And in doing so, they build something rare, silent control, a type of power that doesn't need to be displayed, doesn't need to be explained, doesn't need to be validated. It just works, and it's precisely here that everything starts to make sense, because when you understand this game, you realize it was never about brute force, but about how you position yourself within it. Now the question is no longer theoretical and becomes personal. How many times have you put yourself at a disadvantage trying to be understood, accepted, or fair in an environment that clearly didn't operate by those same rules? How many times have you over-explained yourself, reacted too quickly, trusted too soon, and to be direct? What has that brought you to where you are now? Because if nothing changes, the pattern repeats itself. And it is precisely this pattern that these ideas have come to break, not to turn you into someone cold, but into someone lucid. Someone who understands that decisions based on real human nature require more than good intentions. They require strategy. From now on, the game changes, but only if you decide to play differently. Will you continue to be accessible to anyone? Will you continue to react impulsively? Will you continue to expect automatic reciprocity from those who have never shown they deserve it? Or will you start to apply, even gradually, what you've seen here? A firmer no, a more strategic silence, a less predictable response. It may seem small, but that's exactly how control begins. And ultimately, that's what differentiates those who are constantly being pulled by circumstances from those who begin to control them. As has been said in many ways along the way, it's better to be feared than loved, but above all, avoid being easily manipulated. So let me challenge you with something simple, but unsettling. Who have you become to fit into other people's worlds, and how much is that costing you today? If any part of this resonated with you, don't ignore it. Because awareness without action becomes accumulated frustration, and you've already realized that continuing as you are is no longer an option. Now tell me in the comments, which of these tactics do you most need to apply to your life today? And if you want to continue learning how to position yourself intelligently without falling into invisible traps, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what you saw here is just the beginning.